My name is Ameem Lutfi. I'm a research fellow here at the Middle East Institute, and I will be your host today for a very promising and timely and important discussion on the broader strategic overview of the Gulf Cooperative Council, or GCC, economies. This event has been brought together through a joint collaboration between the Middle East Institute here at NUS and Trends Research Advisory. Established in 2014, the Abu Dhabi-based independent advisory and research center Trends has fast emerged as a leading voice in the Middle East, offering detailed and cutting-edge analysis on the different opportunities and challenges impacting the Gulf and beyond. In addition, Trends has been involved in offering deep analysis for regional and national level decision makers to help better shape policies for the future. Alongside the middle here at the Middle East Institute, this event forms part of a broader effort in forming broader coalitions with various research centers and think tanks around the world in order to bring in very specific from the ground news and analysis from the Middle East to our audience here in East Asia and the broader Southeast Asia and Asia in general. And in that it's also, I want to point out here that we earlier had an annual conference around a similarly themed, similarly themed event on how there has been a broader turn within the Middle East towards Asia. The Middle East has tried to diversify, let's say, for its dependence or its partnerships with the West to now looking at the East as well. All right, so we'll have Amal. You can set up the scene, let's say.
Exactly.
To then follow it up into more details, specifically about the country's vision and diversification framework by Mr. Mohammed Hamdoui, who's the head economic research department at Trends. And we will follow it with a discussion of the current sort of more cutting edge current trend and what's on the horizons with Mr. Mohammed Hamdoui. And we will follow it up and end with a focused discussion on key sectors and opportunities with Mr. Stephen Blackwell. And with that, I want to hand over the floor to Ms. Amal Al-Bariki to set up the discussion.
Okay. I think let me just start by saying that Amal Al-Bariki is one of our brightest research analysts. She's a young Emirati, and she's definitely kind of the future of Trends in terms of research and contribution from Emirati men and women into the research agenda and into shaping the policies and contributing to the global debate around key issues that pertain to the region, but also to the world. And Amal, you take it from there.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I think good evening, presuming that it's 5 p.m. there. And thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for Ameem, and thank you, Sharon, as well. I'm Amal Al-Bariki, a researcher at Trends Research and Advisory. Thank you, Hamdawi, for the very humbling introduction. I'll start by giving a small introduction about Trends first. So Trends Research and Advisory is a private independent research institution established in 2014 in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It focuses on foreseeing the strategic, political and economic aspects of the future. It's also the broad area of interest include issues relevant to the Gulf, to the Middle East, and to the world at large. So in addition to keeping track of global issues of shared human commonalities, we have various research programs that, like I said, focuses on Middle East security, on sustainable development, and economic as well. So our agenda for today is going to be, I'm going to give an overview of the GCC economies, and like Ameem has explained, the rest of my colleagues are going to be talking about the country's vision and the key sectors as well. So I will be briefly speaking on some of the characteristics of the GCC's economies, as well as give a quick overview on each of them. I'm not going to expand much, but um, I'll give you the full picture of how each economy, I guess, operates and what relies on and so on. So the GCC economy, ever since, the GCC or the Gulf Cooperation Council, ever since its establishment in 1981, which is composed of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, and Oman as well, share this international, I guess, economic unit that has that are bonded with like mutual cooperation among the member countries, and that advocate for regional integration. So within the regional integration, they established free trade agreements, they implemented the GCC Custom Union and Gulf Common Market. So throughout the years, the GCC, ever since its establishment, has shown a sturdy annual growth and financial surpluses. So overall, the Gulf economies have over $2 trillion in accumulated sovereign wealth funds and around $40 trillion in oil and gas reserves as of 2020. So this speaks volumes of the GCC's heavy reliance on oil and gas revenues, which remains to be the case today, with more than 50% of the GCC's revenues coming from oil, as well as much of the non-oil sectors are being funded by the oil and gas revenues. So the fluctuating nature of the oil and gas sector has motivated the Gulf state to consider more diversified alternatives and look further into non-oil sectors, which my colleague Hamdawi will extensively talk about in a bit. So moving on, some of the interesting characteristics of the GCC economies are its youthful population. From the GCC itself, and the impact it has on its economy is the youthful population. So the structure and demographic of the GCC's population is quite complex, and the MENA itself has a massive youthful population. So the percentage of the population that is under the age of 25 goes from 25% in Qatar to 50% in Oman, while here in the UAE, it stands at 34%, 35% in Bahrain, 40% in Kuwait, and 46% in Saudi Arabia, which is massive. So this could potentially pose as a threat or a future challenge for the oil-dependent state. And if the current status quo of the youth in the region is not addressed, um, so it could impact, I guess, the outcomes, because having like a youth bulge in the region could turn into a liability to the state by having generations upon generations fully dependent on the government, or it could be an asset that would generate opportunities for economic growth. So I think recently the UNICEF has released its Generation 2030 report on MENA, and it estimated that the most favorable period for the MENA region as a whole, and the Gulf included, will be between 2018 and 2040, when the dependency ratio is at its lowest, which creates an opportunity for a demographic dividend that would help these economies kind of divert away from being oil dependent and pursue their diversification plans. So this is why I think it's profoundly, the outcomes profoundly depend on whether the GCC countries are willing and committed to invest in their youth, their development and education, and eventually the region's future as well. And from what we've seen across the GCC recently, strong efforts have actually been made regarding enabling and equipping the younger generations. The UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain all have national youth strategies that focuses on helping the youth realize their potential. The third characteristic of the GCC economy is the imbalanced labor market with heavy dependence on foreign labor. So expats in the region make up half of the GCC's population, with an average of 50% in comparison to the MENA region, wherein the percentage of expats is at 9.5%. This is strongly reflected on the labor market, which created an imbalance between nationals and expats in both private and public sector as well. So with the public sector being oversaturated with nationals, while they're underrepresented in the private sector. I read a recent a study that said that according to the World Bank, around 40 to 60% of some of the GCC's budget, the GCC budget allocate 40 to 60% of its annual budget to wages, compensations, and social security, which only adds to the fiscal burden that these oil producing states have to bear. And like I mentioned above, there are some efforts made for diversifying the economy that Hamdawi will get to in a bit. Now I'll just give a brief, introduction about each of the GCC's member states' economies and what it looks like. So most of the GCC's countries are large in populations, and overall they have a strong and rich economies. And as we discussed earlier, they are very similar in nature, with oil and natural gases dominating the main exports, as we see here with Saudi Arabia being the largest economy in the region. One of its main exports is crude and refined petroleum. Another interesting commonality that I found between all of these GCC states is that they share common trading partners, mainly from South Asian countries that heavily depend on oil coming from the GCC. Moving to the United Arab Emirates, which is known as the most diversified economy in the region, but again, the main exports remains to be crude and refined petroleum, which is just oil and gas. And they still share like I mentioned, the trade partners with the South Asian countries. Similarly here with the main exports for Kuwait and Oman as well, and Bahrain in Qatar. So I think moving forward, the set challenges or like the characteristics that I've mentioned above about the GCC economies have to be addressed, because they could pose as a challenge or as an obstacle to their diversification efforts, especially during COVID right now with oil prices declining. I guess what I'm trying to say is they have to be addressed in order to move forward. But nonetheless, I think it's worth highlighting that the solid nature of the GCC's economies have enabled them to adapt to the ever-changing economic conditions. Like some of the recent numbers that came out the GDP growth rate reaching 1.8% in 2020 for the 2021 for the GCC countries, and that will reach 2.7% in 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Amal. And I think that's a great introduction. I think the key point there is that the GCC economies are strong. They're rich countries, but despite despite the effort, they still depend heavily on oil, and they have different sizes of oil reserves, productions, and revenues between. There are some differences, and you can see in these tables. But this oil is still the backbone of all their economies and has been the backbone for decades. And we have seen efforts to grow the non-oil sector for quite some time now, but it still contributes heavily to the GDP and countries' budgets, which is a challenge when prices of oil have been fluctuating in the way they did over the last few years. And as you can see, I mean, it goes without saying that the region is a critical region for oil production and gas production, for that matter. And the table on the left, it shows the production. Those are 2019 production. So the numbers have come down a little bit, but it's still a key contributor to the oil supply worldwide, and which is a key driver for global economic growth across the world. It's also very important to the region. And as Amim said, the Middle East has been shifting or balancing its relationship and trade relationship globally and focusing on Asia. We've seen a big shift as well towards Africa. So I think that's one of the other elements I'm going to talk about later, is that the Middle East as a region, and the GCC countries specifically, is looking at diversification of partners, whether it's security partners, trade partners, or economy partners. And China and Japan, as shown in Amal's slides, are some of the key partners importing oil and other products from the region. The chart to the right, which is, I think, relevant to our conversation, is that despite the efforts, I mean, some countries have been more successful than others, as you can see in the charts. I mean, Oman and Bahrain generally have a lower production, as you see from the chart. So the impact of, especially for Bahrain with a small production of oil, but some countries like UAE has had strong success in achieving diversification, but still oil exports or petroleum exports contribute 49% or contributed 49% of the total countries export in 2018. And in 2017, the oil and gas sector, the petroleum sector, contributed around 22% to the GDP. I'm going to get into it later, but one of the main goals of the vision of UAE Vision 2021 was that the non-oil sector contribute 80% to the GDP by 2021. So with this background around the dependency on oil and gas, I'll go to the next slide, which is, when you look at the chart there, this is the Brent price from 2006 to July 2020. That was for a piece we published around the impact of the oil markets in the post-COVID area, or the impact of COVID on oil markets. And you can see, I mean, we had the major three price collapses. The 2008. Where prices went from 147 to 37 in a matter of few months, as you can see there. Then we have the other one in 2014, 15, and 16, which was driven by, slightly driven by different drivers compared to 2008. This one mostly was a supply glut from the US shale oil boom. Advancement in technologies allowed the production of tight oil, and that production increased, chasing the good prices, and we see the impact. And then we saw the impact of the COVID pandemic, which was again driven by completely different dynamics, where we saw kind of a drop in demand, almost instantaneous, where people being confined at home, not able to travel, not able to use their cars, industrial output dropping, the decline in use of diesel, jet fuel, etc. caused that massive decline in demand and hence decline in price. We have recovered since then, so in the mid 60s, kind of high 50s. So with that background, I think the GCC countries recognized more than 10 years ago, so even before that, that dependency on oil is unsustainable. You can't be at the mercy of these markets. And then with the increase in production from the US and Russia and discoveries left and right, challenging kind of the prices, that will be something that is not sustainable for the economies of the GCC. Again, Amal mentioned that, so price fluctuations have challenged national budgets across all sectors, and we've seen the responses go from a reduction in investment budgets to a reduction in social spending. Government asking the different government entities to reduce their budget by 10, 20, sometimes 30%. And to do that, these kind of were short-term responses. So the GCC countries started by responding short-term in terms of addressing the imbalances in the short term, but that situation called for a longer-term vision for diversification of the economy and increase of contribution from non-oil sectors. And that's what led to a series of national visions that were started back in 2008 for Qatar and Bahrain, 2010 for the UAE. So the next few slides will go into a bit more detail for each one of them and go through kind of what they mean for diversification efforts, what they mean for opportunities in the future. And these visions have, they had a lot of things in common, and they have still a lot of things in common. They were developed in using different approaches, different collaboration and discussion with the societies, but they all have kind of four overarching themes. I think one which is critical is the preservation of the national identity and values, and I think that goes line in line with what Amal was talking about in terms of the demographics of this region. So you want to bring about a change to the economic structure, to drive other sectors and go through this change, because these visions are not just about the economy, they are about changing societies, as we're going to see when we talk, for instance, about the Saudi Arabia vision. And to do so, you have to do that while maintaining what is unique for this country. So the national identity, the values, the national heritage, all that was common between all these countries. The other one is, again, it goes hand in hand with the fact that these countries have a large youth population, and I would argue that they are an asset that the countries need to monetize, and the only way to do it is through world-class education systems and improving research and development with focus on science and technology. And again, you're going to see in the visions that they all talk about improving the education system, putting money into the improving R&D, bringing the best minds here, competing to attract talent worldwide. And we've seen a lot of efforts with visa, new visa rules and remote working rules and the ability to have longer term residency, which definitely opens the door for a lot of people to think of this region and the UAE mainly. That's the country I'm talking about for these events. I'm sorry, I said events. Somebody was knocking on my office and distracted me. Sorry about that. What I'm saying is that all these changes that happened, and I'm mentioning the UAE in terms of visa, would basically open the door for a lot of people who have ideas, who have innovative ideas, who are looking for a location for their great idea, new startup, to think about the UAE as a strong competitor for that. The third element is around diversification of the economy. So it's mainly reduced dependency on oil, and most importantly, increase the contribution from the private sector. We cannot, as I said, it's unsustainable to look for the government to drive the spending and the economic economic wheel. We need or this countries, GCC countries need the private sector to play a much bigger role, and through SMEs and through support for SMEs. And the last element, which goes in hand in hand with any initiative, is actually these countries have to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the government, and make sure that the legal institutional frameworks are transparent, stable, and are not ever changing. And I think we've seen a lot of efforts about accelerators in government entities in countries around the GCC, which is something that you don't see a lot, you haven't seen in other countries. I'll go into each individual country's vision here and just cover the main points. The UAE was one of the first countries to announce its vision in 2010. I think that the key objective, or it has the objective to make the UAE amongst the best countries in the world by 2021. And it goes into making that across all the facets of life. So it's not just about the economy, it's about safety, it's about the quality of living, it's about the standard of living, it's about education, it's about healthcare, it's about a lot of different things. But it was really, it kind of summarized that vision into 6 main priorities for the country. So it's sustainable environment and infrastructure. So environment and sustainability and the protection of natural resources is key. And this region has a lot of natural resources in terms of oil and gas and minerals, but there's definitely a problem with water resources, and the ability to secure food production here is a challenge as well. So sustainable environment and infrastructure is one of the key elements there. World-class healthcare, so the focus on making sure that the healthcare system is world-class and is also well-funded to be able to handle crisis. And I think for the UAE, I would say, not biased to the UAE because I live here, but through this pandemic, we have seen that the UAE was kind of one of the countries that was looked at as a model in terms of the handling of the crisis. So above and beyond ensuring that people's livelihood lives and livelihoods are protected, food and medicine was secured. People had access to testing. There was massive testing. People had access to quality healthcare. And it's actually, if you look at all the metrics in terms of cases and deaths, it's loss of life. The UAE has done amazingly. And last but not least, I think the vaccination efforts that are happening here are also another testament to the quality of the healthcare in this country. Education is a critical element that all these visions focused on the UAE as well. Knowledge economy, you're going to hear me saying that over and over because it's another element that all these countries are focusing on. So you have youth, you have a great human capital. How can you provide them with good education, and how can you provide them to be players in the knowledge economy, so that's not going to depend on natural resources, but it's going to depend on the brains of the people playing in the economy. Safe public and fair judiciary, it's self-explanatory, and a cohesive society and preserved identity. And I think that's the element I was talking about in terms of preserving identity. So you can use your identity as a way to promote the vision for the country, but also to drive sectors like tourism, which I'm going to get to later. And I think in terms of metrics, as I mentioned before, there was an objective to increase the contribution of the non-oil sectors to GDP to 80% by 2021. I didn't have a chance to look at the data for 2020, but definitely the 22% contribution of oil sector in the GDP is close to 20. So we're on track to achieve that objective. As a side kind of side to the Vision 2022, the UAE launched its Energy Strategy 2050. Again, thinking that, or the aim is to increase the contribution of clean energy to 44% of the energy makeup in the UAE. which is the UAE embracing the energy transition. So we know that the energy transition is happening. It may be, you may have difference of opinion around the speed, velocity, the direction, but ultimately we all agree that there are a lot of forces that are pushing towards kind of growth in renewable energy to the expense of fossil fuels. And the UAE, through this vision, has set kind of the train in motion to make sure that the country achieves that. And just a few days ago, the UAE launched its industrial strategy, which they called Operation 300 billion. And that was mainly to promote the development of the industrial sector. As I think, the messaging from all the levels of government here is that that's a key sector for the economy, and that will be part of the key drivers for the economy post-oil. Kuwait launched its new Vision 2040 in 2017, and it's a national development plan with 7 pillars. And again, those pillars are mentioned there. So enhance the country's regional and global presence in diplomacy, trade, culture, and philanthropy. So it's, again, beyond and above just the economy. It's actually the image of the country is the use of the culture of the local content to promote the country. Development of national infrastructure, as again, some countries are better than others in terms of the state of infrastructure, the state of development, the diversification effort. So this is critical for Kuwait. Again, here talking about the education system and kind of reforming the education system and enhancement of the training of the workforce, and improvement or enhancement of the public administration. Similar to what we talked about before. So how can you reform the government to increase transparency, accountability, and efficiency? Healthcare is another topic that's going to come back for all of them. And sustainable, diversified economy. So reduce reliance on oil revenues and increase contribution of the non-oil sector. And I think for Kuwait is very important because petroleum exports contributed 81% of the total export in 2018, and they contribute about 55% of the country's GDP. So for Kuwait, it's a much bigger issue than the rest of the other countries. And again, sustainable living environment. So that goes into protecting the natural resources, making sure that you're realizing that economic development while maintaining natural resources, reducing the use of water, and food. And I think, again, one thing I'm gonna get into at the end is around oil and gas is here to stay. So for quite some time. So we may disagree on when the peak oil is going to happen, but the oil sector is still going to be an important sector for this country. So all the visions talk about how you can maximize the value created from oil and gas until the day where oil and gas are not part of the mix, if you want to call it that way. So there's a big push here to boost refining and petrochemical output. I think on the petchem side, if I remember correctly, Kuwait was talking about tripling the output by tripling the output by 2040. And they are also talking about the developing gas resources. So gas as a transition fuel, but also increasing the value derived from each barrel of oil in this country is important. Oman, again, has a Vision 2040. It's a guide and a reference and a key reference for planning activities in the next 2 decades. That's kind of from the introduction of the document. And they had a lot of consultation with all parts of the Omani society. And again, I'm not going to go into details on each one of them. Again, education, scientific research, economic leadership and management. So how you can have clear vision around where you're going, diversification and fiscal sustainability. Again, it goes without saying that it's not prudent to continue to depend on oil receipts. Private sector, I think they focus here about how can you increase the contribution of the private sector in the economy. Again, natural resource and environment sustainability, and focus on national identity. Again, that's the same topic. Bahrain has, as I said, one of the countries that launched its strategy or its vision early in the process, and it's a vision for the government, society, and the economy. Again, it's not just about the economy, it's about a combination of things, a transformation exercise for all the facets of life. And here they slightly different approach in terms of how they structure the vision, but it's sustainability. So, we can't continue, or Bahrain cannot continue to depend on government spend alone. In here, lower reliance on the public sector. Private sector needs to play a much bigger role, and the government needs to improve efficiency and effectiveness. So, high quality policies, predictability is key, transparency, and develop its citizens' capability. So, going back to education and development of the human capital. I think they talk about the fairness. So, economic growth and prosperity have to positively impact the lives of all citizens fairly. And all citizens should be able to access the same opportunities and live equally in a just and thriving society. And the other element is around competitiveness and attractiveness of the economy. So I think it's critical here that element of attractiveness of the economy, it's applicable for all the GCC countries, is we're going to go as we move towards the industrial revolution, kind of impact of these new technologies on the economy, knowledge economy. You're going to have to compete really hard for talent. You're going to have to compete for this bright minds that are using artificial intelligence to solve problems. So the competitiveness element of these economies is critical for all these countries. I'm going to go to Qatar, and then I'll go to Saudi Arabia. And the objective here, transforming Qatar into an advanced country by 2030. They talk about 4 main pillars: the human development, again, going back to the same theme, social development, economic development, environmental development. And let me go back to Saudi Arabia. And again, I'm not sure where the slide went, but the vision was announced in 2013. Vision 2030 was announced in 2016. And actually, that probably in terms of the impact of that vision or the objective is beyond and above what we've heard in all the countries, because it aims to transform and modernize the Saudi society and set the country on a journey of economic and social prosperity that is less dependent on oil. So the vision was expressed in 3 main pillars. So the country wants a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. And it's a really detailed document. When you look at it, it's a detailed roadmap to achieve these main pillars. And they classify them into 6 overarching and 96 strategic objectives. So that goes into a level of detail that goes above and beyond any kind of any strategic document, if you want to call it that way. So it's not only Saudi Arabia is the most populated country in the region, is the largest economy. It's one of the G20, but it has the biggest challenge of all the GCC countries into addressing all the issues that Aman was talking about. So heavy dependency on oil, a very young population, a large population, and a country that is going through this change and kind of societal change, but also a desire to diversify the economy and modernize the society and provide employment opportunities for youth. So definitely a very formidable project. But again, the 6 overarching objectives are strengthening the Islamic and the national identity. So that's number 1. You want to make sure that you're portraying your culture in the best way possible, offer fulfilling and healthy lives for all Saudi citizens, grow and diversify the economy, increase employment for all, enhance government effectiveness. I think I sound like I'm repeating myself now. If for the last 10 minutes, it's the same kind of topic that are coming back, and enable social responsibility. So everybody is part of this, and everybody has a role to play. On the energy side, which is important to Saudi Arabia, I think that the country intend or desire to increase the localization of the oil and gas industry from 40% to 75%. So we want, the country aims to increase the contribution of locals into that sector. I think they have a big objective of increasing gas production and distribution capacity. I think one of the issues in Saudi Arabia is that there's a heavy dependence on oil for power generation, and you'd rather use oil for for other sectors that are adding a lot more values from a barrel of oil. They want to develop oil and gas adjacent industries, so kind of using the spillover effect, kind of using the oil and gas industry as to increase the contribution from other sectors. And I think that the most important element is increased contribution from renewable energy. This is critical. As I said, this region has been endowed with a lot of sun, a lot of sunny days. In certain areas, a lot of wind as well. And it's important for these countries to, as I said, embrace the energy transition and make sure that you're playing your role in benefiting from the opportunities that you have. I'm going to this slide is busy and it's going to take a lot of time to go through each one of them, but in terms of the drivers and the key sectors that will drive the GCC economies post-oil, but here there's definitely a desire to diversify the economy. The first one, as I said, is making sure that you're deriving the maximum value from oil, gas, and mining industries and resources. So localization is a key theme, and strong added value from each unit of production. So rather than focus on export, you may actually, and we've seen this a lot with a lot of countries around here, around the focus on petrochemicals as a way to add more value to the oil production, and LNG as another way to monetize or add more value to your gas reserves. A lot of mining resources in Saudi Arabia, for instance, we've seen a lot of focus on that as well. The knowledge economy and focus on new technologies. Again, it goes without saying, there's all the strategies all the visions are focusing on that, but also there is a big push to attract and be kind of a center for new technologies and be part of getting the right infrastructure to benefit from the knowledge economy. The promotion of entrepreneurship and there's a typo there. The promotion of entrepreneurship and investment in R&D. I think that we've seen a lot of intra-GCC countries competition for new startups, for talent. A lot of startup programs are happening in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE in general, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, trying to get the next generation of new ideas. Again, investment in education, embracing the energy transition, and playing a much bigger role in renewable energy. We've seen it on the generation side. We've seen a lot of momentum on the technology side. Industry development, and focus on sectors with the highest multiplier effect. And the last 2 points is around the use of national heritage to promote cultural tourism and increase openness of this region to the world. Tourism play a big role in the UAE's economy, not so much in other countries. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there because of the geographic location, but also because of the cultural heritage and natural beauty that can be used to promote tourism. And the last point here, and probably that's going to be my last point, use the vast sovereign funds to drive development in the other sectors. So rather than both internally and externally. And I'll just stop here, Amim, and then develop any further with questions.
Thank you so much. We'll pass along to Dr. Blackwell. Dr. Blackwell.
Okay, thank you very much, Amim. Thanks to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. In the interests of saving enough time for discussion, I won't take too long. I'll just briefly cover some key sectors, primarily from a UAE perspective, but it will also be evident that my focus on these sectors will also touch on the commonalities between UAE in particular and Singapore, course, the bilateral relationship has been broadened and deepened over the last few years. The strategic partnership between Singapore and UAE was signed in 2019, and of course, there are regular meetings of bilateral bodies such as the Abu Dhabi Singapore Joint Forum. As my colleagues have explained admirably, the UAE is, of course, looking to diversify, as are the other GCC countries, but those diversification efforts are set out in the strategic visions that have been developed since around 2008. In terms of sectors, to go through them quite quickly, trade, industry, and investment, of course. There's much that the UAE can do in terms of leveraging its strategic position, and of course, as with Singapore, it's the strategic position is complemented by a high level of integration into the globalized economy. So there's considerable scope in terms of developing as a sector in the UAE. Trade, of course, that's partly facilitated by the presence of free zones, extensive free zone network in the UAE, efforts to develop the industrial sector. Recently, further reforms have been proposed to make the UAE an even more open economy, reducing restrictions on foreign ownership, for example, and a range of measures to make it the business environment in the UAE more friendly to foreign investors. Financial cooperation, of course, financial services is the UAE is a strong and growing sector, which the country is looking to develop in the future. Sustainable development in energy, interlocking topics which are increasingly at the forefront of debate in the UAE over the longer term direction of the economy and the move away from oil and gas. Of course, there are a number of headline projects in the UAE which highlight the importance of sustainable energy. There's Mazda City, which has been developed as a carbon neutral urban zone. Major solar power projects like the Shams solar energy facility, which uses photovoltaic technology to create sustainable and carbon neutral energy. Considerable focus, of course, in the UAE on education and human resource development. The education sector has expanded very rapidly in recent years, both in terms of national educational provision and like secondary education and tertiary education, and also a significant number of international universities setting up in the UAE and providing a very wide range of courses. Health is a sector of increasing importance. UAE has a world-class health provision. The importance of the sector, of course, as in every other country and around the world, has been highlighted by the current pandemic. But health is a sector that's been identified as strategically important, both in terms of, well, not only in terms of supporting and caring for the national and resident populations in the UAE, but also health tourism is a growing sector that we're likely to see expand quite significantly in the years to come. I could also just briefly mention a range of cutting edge technologies, which I understand has figured in recent discussions at ministerial level between leaders from the UAE and Singapore. Technology, artificial intelligence, and interestingly and very relevantly, space technology is a sector that within the UAE has of course been able to realize real achievements recently. Most importantly and famously, of course, the Hope probe, which is developed in the UAE for its mission to Mars. So, in terms of key sectors, there's considerable, a very extensive, very broad range of sectors that are expanding, that are being prioritized from a strategic point of view, and naturally. They overlap to a great extent with some of the key sectors and key interests in Singapore. So the key sectors under development, which are being prioritized, it's intrinsic to this extremely important emphasis on moving away from oil and gas dependency, diversifying the economy, maximizing the development and deployment of human capital, and given the nature of the economic context, the business context in the UAE, there are tremendous opportunities, and key sector development, new key sectors are seen as being of critical importance, not only in terms of national development, developing the potential of the UAE people and both nationals and those resident in the UAE, but also ensuring that the UAE strengthens its integration with the globalized economy, and there's a great deal to look forward to. And I think I'll bring my brief remarks to a close and allow us to move into the discussion session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will help moderate the discussion session. So I invite all our audience to send in our questions. You can either unmute yourself and raise your hand, and I'll call on you to speak, or alternatively, for those who would prefer to send it into writing, send it in either to the MEI events team or to send it to me, and we will address those questions here. While I give some time to people to collect their thoughts and send in the questions, I want to take the opportunity as the moderator tonight to start off with some questions. Firstly, I was wondering if I could ask Amal Al-Riki about, you spoke a little bit about the youth population and how that represents both an opportunity and a challenge. And the question right now is, if the states, if GCC countries can design policies that ensure that they remain a positive influence. So I was wondering if you could set us off by talking a little bit about what are the kind of efforts that are being made to ensure that the youth remains positive and it is an economically productive sector of the economy.
I can only speak for the UAE since I've seen what the efforts are being done here, and just for instance, there are some I guess skill building, because wait, I need to collect my thought. I'm sorry. So from what I've seen here from the Federal Youth Authority, they have some programs, solid programs that would equip youth post-graduation and into their transition to the labor market with professional skills and with all sorts of skills as well that would help them, I guess, build themselves professionally. And I'm not sure about other countries or other GCC countries, but I've read some of the vision that they've had, and most of them also focus on education and the youth's transition to the labor market. But for the UAE, it's very practical. And it's active, especially in the recent years since the establishment of the Federal Youth Authority. I think that was in 2019. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you so much. Now, if I could call upon Dr. Asif Shuja, who is our colleague here at MEI, who works on Iran, to ask a question, and unmute themselves and ask a question.
Thank you, Amin, for this opportunity. And my question is to Dr. Muhammad, and it relates to the project headquarter announced by Saudi Arabia in January this year. And because there's a lot of concern that all the headquarters would be moving away from Dubai to Riyadh. And when this was announced in January, just after that, we see that at least two of the big four, Deloitte and PwC, these two companies showed their intent to move their capital. Saudi Arabia says that just 5% of the regional headquarters are based in Riyadh, and it's targeting the other 95%. So that 95% will be coming at the cost of UAE. So under this backdrop, I would like to ask my question to Dr. Muhammad. Was the disappearance of the slides from his presentation just a result of accident? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. What happened is that I was copying and pasting slides to update for each individual country. And I guess I copied Saudi Arabia was supposed to be after the UAE before Kuwait. I thought I copied the slide, but I didn't. So I start modifying the slide. And I just, it's whenever you have a presentation, all technical issues happen. So just like 15 minutes before the presentation, my computer froze. So we had to recover something. But anyway, it wasn't intended at all. And I think I just go back to what Amal said, we're an independent center. So even if we're based here in the UAE, we tend to have global perspective or regional perspective on global issues without kind of bias. But to answer your question, I think remember I mentioned that there is an intra-GCC competition to attract talent. And it goes without say that you want to attract companies, headquarters, and they bring a lot of employees. They bring a lot of those people who spend money on education, on health, etc. So that the impact is direct and indirect. But it's again, I'm not going to comment whether the impact will be beneficial for one country versus the other. But there will be competition, and I think people or companies decide to be in the UAE for a lot of factors, connectivity, openness, talent. I think, so for that to change in the near future, it's going to take a lot of effort from other countries. But it's certainly the intra-GCC competition is an element. I would say there is opportunities for all the countries to benefit from bring in talent, and I think there's an element of maybe cooperation in terms of bringing that talent. And I would say beyond just attracting the headquarters of companies, I mean, when you think about AI qualified people, which is around, by some estimates, around 90,000 people worldwide, people who have the ability to actually use it to generate ideas and actually practical solution to problems. You have to compete for those as well. So it's a much bigger problem for GCC's countries to attract, headquarters of companies, but also ideas and talents that can drive the next phase of economic development. I hope I answered your question, Dr. Shuja.
Yes, beautifully. Thank you so much. Thank you.
If I may just add something to that, it's an interesting development, and I mean, what I have to say is based really on anecdotal conversations I've had with people in the corporate sector in Dubai. Now, many companies use Dubai as a kind of regional headquarters, and they outsource part of their operations to what you might call branch offices in places like Riyadh and Jeddah and other GCC countries. Now, while those people I have spoken to, while they are concerned about this requirement to base HQs in Saudi Arabia, they don't sound too troubled about it, actually, because it might be a case of just rebadging their branch office in Riyadh as a regional HQ while retaining the bulk of their operation in Dubai. It's never easy to do business in Saudi Arabia, and companies are extremely resourceful in sort of managing these kinds of issues. So I certainly don't think you're going to see this massive exodus of the corporate sector from Dubai or indeed Abu Dhabi to Saudi Arabia. The companies, especially the international companies, they will find a way around it. I think for smaller concerns, I think it could be more of a challenge. But the larger companies, they'll manage it. They'll handle it somehow. I mean, there's always a recruitment issue, and the fact of the matter is that for, say, people coming from North America or East Asia or Europe, Dubai is and Abu Dhabi, they're easier environments to live in and settle in than Saudi Arabia, at least at the moment anyway. So I don't think there's going to be any great change or shift of companies out of the UAE to Saudi Arabia anytime soon.
Thank you so much. We have a question from one of our staff members who sent it in writing, and they're asking, what are the obstacles in the way of transformation, particularly when it comes to societal changes? If anyone and either three of you could take that question.
Listen, it's these visions go beyond and above the economic transformation. And in some countries, it's going to be easier than others. I mean, Steve was talking about living in Saudi Arabia, and for Westerners, if they had to choose, they would always go to the UAE. I think I would say change is always challenging. I think changing people's perceptions and minds and way of doing things is even more challenging. But I think we're not, again, I'm not going to speak for this country, but my view on this vision is that they're not trying, to change people. They're trying to go through playing out or in, how do I say it? I'm thinking out loud here, but you want to focus on the identity. So focus on the national heritage, focused on the local content, but at the same time, bring the best out of it. So rather than stay kind of inwards looking, let the world kind of share the positives about your identity and your cultural heritage and your social makeup and social and traditions, etc. So openness and being able to transform the country into an outward-looking country doesn't always mean that you're going to forego your national identity and your tradition. So I'm not sure if Amal or Steve have a different perspective on this question.
I think having a youthful population makes social change more doable, because youth are susceptible to change. And I think I guess, again, like you, Hamdawi, I'm thinking out loud. I think that with opening the economy and with enabling the youth, change in society is bound to happen. So I think at some point it will happen, I guess, because of how youthful these populations are and how youthful they will still be or remain moving forward. Yeah, I hope that contributes a bit.
No, it does.
Thank you.
No, I could just add that I don't think like preserving and promoting national cultures is incompatible with kind of internationalization and greater openness. The UAE is a very diverse society. but the national culture is very is strong. It's promoted and protected, but it's for a diverse society, it's an extremely comfortable environment, and you know, there's a great deal of mutual respect between different cultures and different national groups. So it's in that sense, UAE is a fine example of how, you know, the country protects its identity and its distinct society, while also being very open and very receptive to people from all kinds of countries.
Thank you so much. We have a question from an NUS student, Kinan. And Kinan is asking, from an entrepreneurial perspective, which country has the potential to become the next Silicon Valley of the Middle East? And he's also asking if you could rank in ease of doing business for expatriate entrepreneurs in different countries in the GCC.
Your student is trying to get me in trouble here. No, I'm just kidding. I think for the ease of doing business, I could just open the ease of doing business report for 2020, and it will show you kind of the ranking. And I don't. I think if I'm not mistaken, the UAE is first and Qatar is second, and I'm not sure about the rest of the countries. But I think it's probably directly linked or proportional to this transformation, if you want to call it that, or this openness trend that happens. So the UAE is many years ahead of the other countries in terms of the adoption of market economy, the openness, the desire to attract expats and foreign companies, the desire to be kind of the regional hub for all businesses in the region. So by default, they have that first mover advantage. Now, I guess the rest of the countries are catching up. You know, in terms of developing strategies to compete and attract the talent. In terms of entrepreneurships, I mean, I can give you examples of two of my best friends. One of them is in circular economy, so the monetization and the recycling of used cooking oil and using grease traps to clean the. You know, I'm not going to go into the details, but he was given the opportunity to participate in one of the accelerators in Dubai. Another good friend of mine started in Dubai from Morocco, came to Dubai. He pitched his idea with a couple of his friends, and then they were successful. Unfortunately, their idea was related to travel, so it happened in the wrong time, but they were able to adjust the idea, and actually they were attracted by Abu Dhabi. So around there, they are here in Abu Dhabi. They were given the free housing for a year. They're given free office, great support from mentors and successful business men and women to actually to be here and be based here, and multiply that by 100, 200, even 1,000. So there are a lot of people who are looking to take their idea where they get the best value and where they have the highest chance to get the funding and take it to market. Nobody is thinking, oh, I'm from this country, I want to be there. So maybe that's running around the bushes in terms of the question, but my personal experience is that there's a very healthy system of entrepreneurship, startup accelerators, support from the government here in the UAE. I'm sure a lot of other countries, Qatar, Bahrain, and other countries are actually on that, trying to catch up to that train as well and providing those opportunities to startups.
Thank you. If I could ask a question, perhaps Dr. Blackwell, or you know, I'd open it to the floor. One of the key points that came across this presentation is about how diversity is the focus for achieving long-term stability. That in order to have long-term stability, you can't have all your eggs in the same basket. And you talked about excellently about how you know, like economic diversification is happening by investing in other fields. I want to ask about the question of geographical diversification, about if there is plans also to diversify investments from only those investments within the country itself and opening up to other countries, perhaps opening industries in other countries, opening ports in other countries. And what does that kind of geographical diversification of the economy look like right now for the different GCC states?
Mohammed,
go ahead, Steve. No, go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
no, I don't. I'm assuming the question is focused on foreign investment from the GCC countries.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there is scope for diversification. Obviously, based on the sovereign wealth funds, I'm thinking
Exactly.
of the UAE's Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA. They're very, very active, but traditionally active in mainly, to the best of my knowledge, I don't have the figures to hand, but I know they've made enormous investments in the UK and the US, for example. I mean, that reflects a kind of traditional sort of security and strategic relationship which goes back many decades. So there is very significant investment. Elsewhere in the Middle East, I think the investment picture might be a bit different. Then we're going on to things like the Abu Dhabi Development Authority, which is we're talking about investments more along the lines of purely aimed at development needs, state building, infrastructure projects, things like this. So perhaps there's scope for more investment from this region to head towards East Asia. I don't know what I'm really not up to date on what the situation is in that respect. GCC funds heading eastwards, but in principle, of course, there's always scope and a rationale for greater diversification for sure.
Yeah. If I may add, absolutely is critical, and it's happening. When it comes to oil and gas, we've seen, Saudi Arabia and UAE, for instance, investing in petrochemical facilities in India and China. So that's to ensure that you build this relationship with your buyers, and then you create value that you benefit from in terms of natural resources. We've seen Qatar invest in other projects outside of Qatar in terms of oil and gas, but we've seen also a lot of investment, as Stephen says. All the sovereign funds have a lot of investments in Europe and North America, and we've seen recently a big shift towards Africa and North Africa as well. So I guess you talked about it initially, Amin, when you talked about the diversification and the shift towards Asia. That's definitely a trend. We've seen also power generation in terms of using solar. We've seen a lot of projects won by Saudi and UAE companies in North Africa, for instance. Egypt and Morocco come to mind, and other projects. I mean, it goes from football to real estate to hospitality to high tech. And again, I don't have the figures in terms of the split geographically, but that's definitely something that has been happening over the last 10 years or so. Maybe a bit more focus on Africa and Asia, and maybe not the developed part of Asia, so Southeast Asia, and would be probably a good target. Africa has probably the largest potential in terms of all this. They can play a big role in the energy transition, because all the metals needed in energy transitions are a lot of reserves, and a lot of production is coming from Africa. So talking about cobalt and lithium, copper, etc. So there's definitely, but also there is a huge potential for electrification, where a lot of people don't have access to basic electricity, and I think renewable and distributed generation could be a big thing. So yes, the short answer is yes, there has been a focus, but I think there is a bit more opportunity to diversify further and build more strategic relationships.
Thank you so much. We have another question from a colleague of ours, Dr. Clemens. Clemens is asking about Islamic banking. And he's asking, can you outline the Gulf-based, the main trends in the Gulf-based Islamic banking, and how have they maneuvered in the fintech space, and the direction of influence between Gulf and Southeast Asia in this aspect, in aspects of fintech? And how has COVID-19 accelerated the digital Islamic finance industry? It's a very technical question, but I'm wondering if any of you can take a stab at it.
I'm just going to wave the white flag. Completely outside of my expertise. I mean, we can have a follow-up conversation with your colleague offline and see if we can we can have a conversation, but I really can't get into that. I wouldn't add any value to that question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't help that either, because I think many people are looking to expand the fintech sector. So, I expect to see a lot more sort of innovation and competition that stems from that. I think it'll become more evident. And given the recent circumstances, the economic impact, and the restrictions we're under, it's. I think it's a case of watch this space, but I wouldn't like to even guess, really comment on any recent changes in those sectors.
I think one thing I probably I'm thinking out loud, don't hold this against me. One thing that we noticed during the COVID pandemic is that a lot of countries opted for direct support to people. So you have certain countries where that's easy. I mean, you have social security numbers in the US, people's taxes, you can easily do that. But in certain countries, let's say in North Africa, it was quite challenging. In Morocco, for instance, where I'm originally from, it was really difficult for people or the government to assess who are the people who actually need that direct support. And it was a cumbersome way of ID verification, this and that, and reliance on the local government entities that are part of the Ministry of Interior. But blockchain, for instance, could could solve the problem easily in terms of making sure that you trace where that support is going, and you have the ability to know that X, Y, and Z is actually eligible for this segment of the support, then the other person is not. So I would say fintech, in terms of addressing the issues that were, that were created by this crisis, create a lot of opportunities for fintech companies to address the payment and direct support, the transfer of money, even the traceability in terms of where support is going. So these countries, the donors who are sending support to countries, there was a lot of report of that not making it to the right people in certain sub-Saharan African countries. Blockchain, fintech technologies can address that, and I'll stop there. I'm not going to say more, otherwise it will be held against me.
We will have another session on fintech on this. I want to ask another colleague of mine, Feng Cheng, to unmute himself and ask his question.
Yes, thanks so much for your presentations. I enjoyed them very much, and I learned a lot. So I do have one question for you guys. And I look at Iran, and one interesting thing is that in terms of UAE-Iran trade, as reported by Iran at the time of the sanctions economy, is that Iran currently has substantial trade with the UAE. The UAE is the third largest destination for Iranian non-oil exports and the second largest source of non-oil imports for Iran, which leads me to wonder, so politics aside, how complementary are the Iranian and the UAE economies as currently structured? And also how complementary or not is Iran's economy and that of the wider GCC? Thanks so much.
Again, this is another difficult question for somebody who's not an expert in Iran. I haven't looked to Iran for many years. I looked at Iran when I was still doing oil and gas back in the US. But yes, I mean, what I can tell you is that I went to a supermarket 2 days ago, and there was Iranian dates. I remember buying them in the UK. They were kind of the small soft dates. So there are a lot of goods that are making it from Iran to the UAE and potentially vice versa. Politics aside, I mean, I would just venture that say yes. I mean, Iran is a vast market, a lot of consumers, and potentially, if things are worked out from an economic perspective, geographic location, yes, there is a lot of potential for mutual beneficial economic gains if the political things are on the side. But that's a big if. I mean, we're talking here about about a big if, and I'll stop there.
Okay,
just to add very quickly,
we're running out of time, but yeah,
very quickly. The historically there was always a considerable amount of cross Gulf trade. So really, the networks that do exist to some extent a kind of modern continuation of those relationships which go back centuries. In theory, there would be scope for. I don't know about the precise complementarities, but some people have speculated that the UAE in some way could serve Iran in the sense that Hong Kong has served mainland China. I think that comparison is a little bit redundant now, but that's sort of one interesting perspective that I've heard on several occasions in the past. But I mean, to some extent, it's certainly in terms of finance and operations of Iranian companies. The recent sanctions regime, sanctions imposed on Iran, has had quite a chilling effect. So the networks are not what they were, and a lot of activities have been prescribed because of international sanctions requirements.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. This has been a very fruitful conversation, and I think this is only the beginning because I'm having a lot of questions still come in. We'll have it's not an easy question, but I'll still throw it out there and wrap things up. And it's from Susan Kurdley, who's at NTU, and she is asking, how are the geopolitical tensions affecting the inward investments into the UAE in particular, but GCC overall?
So if I understand correctly, the question is around or is about the impact of the geopolitical situation on foreign direct investment into the UAE and the region.
I think so, yeah. And
yes,
and also,
sorry, go ahead, Amin.
No.
I was just going to say, this region, people have already factored all the geopolitical risk that you can think of in making decisions to invest. So when you look at the risk map and then you look at kind of the political risks and all the other, risk factors, it's not something new. Yes, there may be an increase in the tensions here and there, but people are comfortable with making investments here and are comfortable with the risk profile of these countries in comparison to the rest of the world. And I don't think the recent, I don't want to, again, Stephen is more around the strategic studies, and I don't maybe call it an uptick in the geopolitical, in the index or heat or whatever the term that they use to describe that. I don't think that has an impact on investment decision at all. If anything, the recent, peace deals and agreements probably are a kind of an opening to hopefully better stability and eventually maybe more attractiveness of the region for foreign investment.
Yeah, no, I just add that I mean the assumption that the Arabian Gulf is a volatile place I think it's really based on the legacy of the Iran-Iraq war, the Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, and those kind of factors. The history now. The Gulf generally is a reliably stable environment because of although there's political conflict, there are different security concerns. There's also a common interest in maintaining the status quo, largely business-friendly environment, and I don't know if there are any kind of indicators or ways of measuring geopolitical risk. I'm sure there are somewhere, but I don't see any urgent strategic threats to this region at the moment.
Thank you so much. Every time we run out of time, but the conversation doesn't end, is a good sign that there's been a healthy and productive discussion. And I hope this is only the first step in a in a much longer and productive collaboration and discussions and through various medium and through various forums. Thank you to all three of you for joining us today and giving us very insightful presentation into the future of GCC economies and diversification. Thank you for all the audience for joining in. Do keep in tune to other events that focus on the similar question of the Middle East's turn towards Asia. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thanks for
Shami.
having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.